Good morning, everyone, and welcome to 1.5 million new homes, the local government challenge, sponsored by Loft and Lovell. My name is Toby Fox, and I'm visiting a different council every month to ask what works and what needs to change to get more homes built. So for the last month, I've been in Sutton in South London, posting a number of videos on YouTube and LinkedIn and TikTok and other channels throughout October. And in this session today, we're going to pick up on one of the threads that came out of those videos, and indeed all of our interviews over the last year, which found that viability is the number one challenge to delivering new homes, according to councils. But in Sutton, we learned that even if schemes are viable, they may not be deliverable, given council's financial situation in particular. So we're going to dig into that in the second half of the discussion today. Meanwhile, in the first 3 months of this year, builders started 3,248 new homes in London, and the city's on track for about 5,000 starts in the calendar year. Since the year 2000, London's tended to see around 30,000 homes built every year, which means we're running at about a sixth of normal levels. So in response to that, the Mayor is starting a consultation on several measures, including fast-tracked planning for sites with at least 20% affordable housing and an initial £322 million to establish a City Hall Developer Investment Fund. Will these measures work? To find out, let's meet our guests. Welcome in alphabetical order, our magnificent panel today. Firstly, Meera Bedi, a housing programme consultant with the Future of London. Hi, Meera. Tracy Bradwell, Land and Viability Director at Loft. Hi, Tracy.
Hi.
Anna Clarke, Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Housing Forum. Hello, Anna. Julie Lorraine, an experienced Chief Financial Officer and former Deputy CEO at the London Borough of Tower Hamlets. Hello, Julie. And hello. Adam Tucker, Head of Regeneration, Enabling and Development at the London Borough of Sutton. Hi, Adam. Welcome, everyone. Audience, encourage your questions and statements through the chat and the Q&A throughout this session. But let's kick off the discussion in the meantime with Anna. Anna, can you set the sort of policy context for us behind the Mayor's consultation and what the main measures are and what impact do you think it'll have?
Yeah, thank you, Toby. Well, I think you've just drawn attention to the kind of headline figure that will be of topmost in the Mayor's mind, is that housing starts have fallen off a cliff, really, in London. So the context of that, this is a problem seen elsewhere, but it's been much sharper in London. It's a whole country thing. So what we saw between 2008 and sort of COVID time, 2022 really, was a period of very sustained low interest rates, when house prices kept going up and up and up, and they kept going up more than anyone expected them to go up. So house builders would buy a site and they would work out what they expected to sell those houses for, and in fact they could sell them for more. So they were making big profits really all the time. It was a good time to be in business as a house builder, and the government kind of saw that as an opportunity to try and get more money for the things that it wanted to spend money on. So affordable housing quotas were pushed up. We had SIL, mayoral SIL, a range of environmental protections, biodiversity net gain. We had improvements to building standards to conserve energy, all these things that add to the cost of house building. And it kind of worked when you were getting higher and higher house prices all the time. And then quite abruptly, low interest rates shot back up again. House prices stalled in London. Some of them have even come down in some parts of the market. So there isn't this spare money to be taxing, but it's very difficult to row back on environmental protections, building safety protections, money that you need for your councils to fund other infrastructure. So it creates a very difficult situation for government if they want to get house building moving. And the government does care about both affordable housing and total housing numbers. And in this policy, we see the two very much kind of tensioned against each other. So as a result of all that, housing starts in London have very much plummeted. But it's very hard to be sure exactly what the cause of that is. We've got all these things going on. We know they have hit worse in London, but we've also had the building safety regulator, which has just totally stalled new housing applications. So that is a key factor in them falling abruptly, because there's this backlog of applications, and nearly all planning applications in London are for high-rise buildings that will have to go through the building safety regulator gateway process. So we know that's a key immediate cause of the crash in the housing starts. So I think it's a difficult time to be bringing in new measures, assuming it's viability, when we do know viability is an issue for those reasons I've just outlined, but there's this other cause as well. So what the mayor's doing in his consultation, so this is a consultation that isn't out yet. They've just given a heads up that it's coming out soon, and it will be out this month. They've said it'll be for 6 weeks, so it's what we know about it, and it's offering a fast-tracked planning route for developments that have at least 20% affordable housing, but 10% of that can be grant funded. So it means that the market housing is only cross subsidising 10% from the Section 106, really, which is quite a big reduction on what the London boroughs would like to have, really. So there's a big disappointment by many in the social housing sector that we're kind of accepting that we can't cross subsidise anything like as much as we'd like to be able to. And there's also a reduction in SIL for the developments that meet this 10% plus 10% criteria. It is time limited, and I think this is really important, and it's definitely one to pick up on in consultation. They're suggesting it will apply till the end of 2028. So the intention is that these measures will not get factored into land prices. So when developers are bidding for new sites from now on, we do not want them bidding up the land value because they're expecting that these measures will continue. We want them to apply only to sites that are already bought, already stuck in the system, already paid for, without realising all the other bad things that were going to happen. So I think the measures that make that really certain to end and to stop the land prices going up is probably what we'll be looking to focus on at the Housing Forum in consultation responses. That's what I'd probably suggest people looked out for.
Thanks, Anna. And I should explain to everyone that you're currently in a hotel room having attended the Building Awards last night. So your Wi-Fi is slightly dodgy, but we heard all of that. So
apologies for that. Yeah,
not at all. Not at all. It's great. Meera, I'm going to come over to you. So from the point of view of Future of London, how are you viewing this consultation? Are these measures actually going to deliver what you want to see in terms of housing delivery? And I've got a particular query around the SIL reductions, because we know that communities resist change and development because they don't get the infrastructure to support that change and development. Is the reduction in SIL going to impact that and therefore erode further community trust in change and local government's sort of plans for new homes and new places?
Okay, thank you, Toby. I'll tell you what we do know. What we do know is that the mayor definitely does believe in affordable homes. He's supported it. He's championing it every election that he's got through. We know that he really does believe in mixed communities. He doesn't want, the centre of London to be a desert for workers, etc. We also know that the mayor and the government are very keen to increase the supply of all housing to reduce the gap between the haves and the have-not. And we also know that homes cost a lot less than homelessness, in the sense that you get better school attendance, you get better health outcomes, you get better mental health when you've got your own bedroom, etc., etc. But targets have been reduced, and informally previously as well, through planning applications that are pulled in by the GLA. They are often, when developers are telling us that they're not viable and they can't meet the targets, they're called in, and we know that developers have got away with not delivering targets over the past few years anyway. So it looks like we're now in a place where half a loaf is better than none, which it definitely is if you are a starving woman. But it does feel like short-termism, as Anna's just said, if it's only for 2028. We know the tankers of social policy take ages to turn around. So that's challenging in itself. So yes, I'm not starving. I might have half a loaf, but it does feel like a bit short-termism. And how do you get back to batch baking and feeding everybody is kind of the issue. I can't really speak for all of Future of London. We haven't had a big debate in the office. So this is probably me speaking as an individual, but someone who's had a lot of development experience. Planning fast track, there is this, and that's great that he's saying that let's fast track some planning through, let's get these big projects going. 20%, as I say, better than none. But there is this, that's versus the big delays that we've heard about in the building safety gateway journey, let's say, and how long that's taking. So yes, we used to bitch about things taking a year to get through planning, and then all the other things that you have to do to submit a planning, all the forms, all the surveys, all the checks and balances that you have to do before you even submit something. And it takes a very long time and a lot of resource to submit for a planning application. But on top of that, now when you've got your planning, you then have to develop something and go through these difficult gateways. Listen, we want to meet these standards. We all build to building regs. If you're going to get a GLA grant, that you have to, and we do a really good job in London. But what about the fact that, sorry, I'm adding to everything, but the new prospectus is coming out in autumn from the GLA. I think we're meant to bid on that affordable housing programme.
Yep.
And so how do we reconcile this policy that's coming in now with our bids, lots of housing associations, our developers, and what are they bidding on? How are they going to look at that? Obviously, they'll sort it out, very clever people, but there's a lot going on, and it seems to be coming at the crisis crunch now, when obviously the level of house building is completely unacceptable for us and for housing need. You've asked particularly about SIL. I would say when you're talking about things getting through planning, that my neighbours do not know what SIL is. Why would they? When I'm doing a consultation, I've done a couple recently for a big regen scheme, you put your boards up, you stand there from 4 till 7:30 of an evening. SIL is never ever raised. Yes, people don't even say what's in it for me because they know that housing is needed. Most people are very cynical and think by that stage the scheme's going to be built out anyway. It doesn't matter what I say. There is that lack of empowerment. Even though everybody is a bit of a NIMBY, there is that lack of empowerment. They don't understand how they could stop these juggernaut schemes coming through that are manifest in London more than others places. So still, I would say, yes, not major factor in my experience when looking at development. However, it is a shame because local authorities were able to use it for, road traffic schemes, other development, other benefits that were definitely responsible for highways, or always trying to grab roundabout improvement SILs. But, it's very difficult for the public generally to understand that. What they would want to see, obviously, is homes for their sons and daughters, like we all do. But I don't know. It's the short-termism. It's only till 2028. How can you control this? We are in a capitalist society, it would seem. And so, therefore, you can't stop the market or control the market, Anna, by saying, I think you shouldn't consider it. People will. And that's the way it goes.
Thank you, Meera. Thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, I completely accept that. So, Adam, over to you. And lots and lots of threads for you to pick up on whichever you desire. But I'd like to start with this idea that housing starts to fall off a cliff. Can you confirm that that's the case in Sutton as well? Or are there places that are kind of kicking against that trend? And is half a loaf better than none? How do you feel about that loss of cross subsidy?
I do like an analogy, as most of you all know, and thank you for your question, Darren. I've seen that you got a question in the chat. Good to see you again. I think it's a sad situation, obviously, and my driver for this is we need to be building homes, and we particularly need to be building social and affordable homes. The reality is that developers are profit-driven businesses, and they will not build homes that they cannot sell. And the challenge that we have is that the market in London at the moment is such that developers are reluctant to move schemes forward because they can't sell them for what they thought they could sell them for. So that comes down to an interest rate and confidence in the market and confidence in the country type issue, which is not necessarily about supply and demand. I think that the mayor felt he had to do something. I am not resolved as whether this is the right thing to do. And the reality is, my fear, and I'm going to say this, my fear is that what's actually going to happen as a result of this policy is that there are going to be delays, because what's going to happen is a whole load of people in the development industry are going to go, okay, we need to get our heads around this now. And, that will happen as fast as it can, but it's likely there could be, say, 6 months delay to things while people, review plannings, think, well, actually, we've got a planning at 35%, but maybe we'll go back to one at 20% now. So what this actually might inadvertently do, controversial, is actually further stall developments, homes being delivered in London, which would be an absolute tragedy, and obviously, the complete opposite of what it was designed to do.
And on top of that, Adam, there's consultation as well. It's not just introducing the measures; it's introducing the idea of the measures.
Yes, well, it's this way that we do things by focus groups these days, don't we? We link something and we see whether people get upset about it, and then we may or may not do it. That's kind of where we've got to as a country. I mean, one of the things that I would, obviously, given my perspective, celebrate is that affordable housing providers, registered providers, we are counter-cyclical. Okay, so we don't build to a profit, and what we could do right now is we could have a significant program where local authorities and housing associations step in and purchase additional homes from developers, because if we're going to use the loaf analogy, so perhaps for a developer, getting 85% of the price of a loaf is better than getting no price of a loaf, because private buyers aren't able to buy because of interest rates and all those things. So what would actually deliver a whole load of homes for people in London that are needed would be, councils and housing associations purchasing at an appropriate price, obviously, a lot of homes that are there. Now you get into issues about standards and, poor doors and all of those things with that. But it's far easier to put somebody in a home that's already built that you can buy than, spend a couple of years buying stuff. In Sutton, we have been doing that. We have done a deal with Berkeley Group. We are literally buying homes, and we are buying direct from developers. We funded it through Right to Buy and some grant as well from the GLA, and it's working, and we're looking to buy more, and that will deliver homes on sites that are already there and will unlock the developments which are stalled as a result of the price point not being at the point that the developer wants to sell.
Yeah, and Sally Rawlings has pointed out that they're already doing that in Ealing as well, and I've heard it's being done in Westminster and elsewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a sensible approach. And as long as you can get quality.
Absolutely. And just to go back to the first question, though, so have you experienced this sort of slowdown in starts as well? This is London wide.
Yes, we've seen it, and Anna is quite right to point out the BSR issue, and it specifically applies to London, given that I think everything in London is HRRB and needs to go through Gateway 2. So that's significant. And I think one of the things I would mention, which is coming down the track, of course, is there is a Gateway 3. And so everybody's focused on Gateway 2 at the moment, which is, about getting things on site. But of course, to actually have homes that people can live in, guess what? Everything's got to get through Gateway 3. So that's coming down the track and needs to be focused on as well.
Happy days. Anna, I'm going to come to you in just a second. I just want to check in with Tracy first. Tracy, do these measures actually make schemes viable?
I think it will unravel, actually. I don't think it's as simple as that. We've had a lot of clients approach us and ask us what this really means. And we've had parts of information that are under consultation, but nobody will really understand that until it comes into force. All of this is positive. I know we could feel negative about 20% affordable housing being delivered instead of 35, but I think Meera touched on a very good point. A half loaf is better than than nothing at all. And if you keep the standard and won't be able to have a pragmatic view about delivering less affordable, then there'll be no affordable being delivered at all. So I think but there's other things that Adam picked up in a couple of parts as well about how councils and RPs are looking at delivering more affordable housing and without actually building themselves. And councils potentially are doing this more than registered providers. And as Ian already pointed out, and you mentioned Westminster and Sutton, acquiring new build homes from developers at less than market price, but still at a reasonable price, is a really good way of delivering affordable homes now. Others are looking at buying street properties. We're working with a few clients who are doing that, and we're helping with that prospect. So people are being looking completely outside the box at how they can acquire more affordable homes in their boroughs and in their councils. I could go on about some other bits and pieces, but I would like some other people to speak a little bit.
Sure. Tracy, thanks. I mean, I'm very naive about these things, but I sort of think if we didn't have a system where councils could buy new houses at slightly below market rates, then we would invent that system, because it seems like a very sensible way to get new homes built. Anyway, Anna, you wanted to raise a point, and also I'd like you just to respond to Darren Nathan's point. Do these measures become permanent?
Yeah, the quick point I wanted to make was around the building safety regulator and Gateway 3, and we are absolutely hearing of stuff getting held up at Gateway 3, and these are brand new homes built and ready to be lived in that are sitting there empty because it's getting held up at Gateway 3. So it's a really pressing issue that the government does seem to understand, but really needs to get a grip on quickly. And I think the time-limited nature is the real thing to watch, really. I mean, the government's intention clearly is that they don't become permanent. The ways in which I fear they might is if the end date is woolly, if it's fluffy, if there's suggestions perhaps from other political parties that might be in power in a few years' time that they would be more relaxed about it, then that could be factored into what developers pay for land. The other way in which they might is if construction costs remain really high and house prices remain pretty static, and there are parts of London, some sites, some brownfield sites, that are so difficult to deliver that the cost of building the housing is roughly what it's selling for. So the land price is already pushed right down to zero, and that is the case in some sites in London. Then they'll have to be permanent, because you can't build housing for less than it costs to necessarily going to get for selling it. So if there are sites like that remain so challenging on the fundamentals, there's no way we can get extra affordable housing out of them unless we put a lot more grant in.
Great, thanks, Anna. Okay, Julie, coming over to you. So pick up on any of the threads that you've heard so far. But I mean, I guess the main point of all of this is, will it get more homes built?
I think there's a real danger that we can all spend the short time window that this has talking about what's wrong with it, why we can't do it, and what the problems are. To me, I think, talking from a CFO perspective, what is the market opportunity at the moment in London? It's temporary accommodation that's absolutely killing local authorities. What is the opportunity for acquisitions very quickly? I mean, as a CFO, I would sit there, and for me, it's timeliness. What can I have now? What are the opportunities? In order to do that, I think that government maybe needs to consider one or two tiny parallel small steps that, if taken, could unlock very quickly the opportunities this short-term window allows. I want homelessness to be a short-term problem. I don't want it to go on. I understand that acquiring new units for homeless people is probably going to go down like a lead balloon for those living in existing stock, waiting a long time for improved properties or bigger properties. But if we were to sort in a massive big spreadsheet, I'm an accountant, spreadsheet is my world, we were to sort our sites into stalled, imminent, absolutely could be delivered, and then the next batch, Gateway 2 time frame, and then the next batch, and then we focus on each column, what is the collective best way to finance these? And in this box 1, with this scheme, I would say, and I'm an accountant, not a developer, so I'm just going to put it out there and be quite radical. I would say, number 1, acquire the new homes into the HRA, not third wing development companies, because that just adds an extra tier of costs. Government, if you want this to happen, all you need to do is allow the HRA to charge LHA rents for temporary accommodation. That's not going to cost you a bean, government, because you're paying it already through the local authority and benefit system. You're just paying it by a different route if you do this. And then what I would do is existing tenants, those on waiting lists, they would qualify for the new homes. Those in column 2 and 3 that aren't ready yet to be developed, stop holding those sites empty, turn them into temporary accommodation units, allow the rental value on those. And I'm making this sound really easy. And there's one reason why it's not. And that's because there's no one officer, no one department, even in the Treasury, that can look across the piece and say, actually, if we collaborate and apply some common sense, we can maximise this to the benefit of the Treasury, to the benefit of the Ministry for Homes and Communities, to the benefit of tenants, because the reality is, yes, this might offset some of the interest paying for developers. You should shared ownership on the market. People who are there to buy it can't afford to buy it because the interest rates aren't going to be offset for them. So I'm a pragmatist. What's the market opportunity for a short-term window today? Homelessness, why is it sound to do it in the HRA? Because local authorities are not obliged to charge MRP. You can flip them back to sale or social housing at the right point in time. And the 151s will, and communities as a whole, will benefit from the pressure being taken off the general fund. There's one more magic bullet to this.
Go on.
And that is, unlike the general fund where debt is bad, actually housing market, RSLs and HRAs, they will only succeed if they grow. You only grow if you increase your rent roll. If you're not going to put rents up, you need more units. Why will they only grow that way? Because you create headroom for debt. That debt can finance both compliance with building safety and building new homes. So for me, CFOs on 151s, we need to stop imagining this divorce between the HRA and the general fund, because there is real mutual benefit to communities, to residents, to government and the wider taxpayer about taking a step back and saying, you know what, there's an easy button to press. So that's my view, Toby.
Fantastic. This is the sort of sensible talk you get when you put CFOs in the room with housing and regen people. The conversation suddenly gets much more interesting, doesn't it, Julie? Thank you very much. You drew applause from Adam. Adam, I'm going to ask you to move the conversation on in a second to talk about the idea of deliverability and viability, because I think we're already there. But first, you wanted to make a particular point.
Yes, I mean, genuine applause, Julie, and it's what you've just said there is an entirely pragmatic and sensible solution. What is completely, stuffing local authority finances at the moment is the horrible situation with the housing need and the amount of people in temporary accommodation. And, I think it's 5 or 6 million a day or something. In Sutton, we are in the process of, we're nearly there, we're taking it to committee later this month. We're going to change what were some shared ownership homes that we were building into affordable rent, which we can use as move on for TA, and there is a revenue saving to the general fund. So we're exactly doing that, and it's the right thing to do. And I think, you're totally right there, Julie. It's what can we do now to unlock this? And that perspective you have is fantastic. So thank you.
Okay, and moving on, Adam. So this point that you raised, that, and we're in this conversation now, aren't we? That this idea that you can have a site that's viable, but it's still not deliverable. Do you want to just unpack that for us?
Yeah, sure. This was something which, has been floating around in my mind for a while, and obviously we've spoken about it, Toby. And some would argue it's semantics. However, a scheme is viable if, particularly if you're doing a joint venture with a developer, the scheme makes enough money for the developer to want to invest in the scheme, and the profit range will be about 20% or something like that. The two parties to that transaction, which is normally an RP or a council and a developer, of course, need to invest a certain amount of money to deliver that scheme. So whilst you could on paper have something that mathematically, going back to Julie's spreadsheet, the spreadsheet says this scheme is viable, the reality is the RP or the council doesn't have the funds, either via its HRA or for borrowing, to actually deliver its commitment to the scheme. And therefore, whilst the scheme is viable, as in it stacks up financially on an appraisal basis, it is not deliverable. It's not going to produce homes that people can actually live in, because the council, the RP, they don't actually have the money to put in their bid. Now, when I first started in housing a long time ago, 30 years, social housing and affordable housing was 100% grant funded, and then you got your own costs on top. Mm-hmm. There are some very interesting graphs around about what we've been doing as a country over the last 30 or 40 years with regards to how we fund housing. And if you look at the difference between what we've been putting money into in capital and what we've been putting money into in revenue, as in the benefits bill, it's shifted completely from the 60s and 70s. We're actually spending more on housing than we were 40 years ago, but we're spending it on the revenue side of it rather than building homes. And as Meera was beginning to talk about, building a home, there is a well-established economic multiplier that it benefits in so many other areas in terms of health, education, all of those other things, that actually, why on earth are we not reinvesting in capital? And that will change the actual deliverability as opposed to the viability. And some ideas for that, because let's think about solutions. So there's the land bank, the housing fund, which is being proposed. And there are calls from London councils at the moment for councils to have access to that as well. If councils could borrow money cheaper, that would help. If housing was designated as infrastructure, that would be a game changer. So there are other things that could be done that would massively unlock this, and would, of course, for the government, mean that the homes that are so desperately needed would be built.
Adam, thank you very much indeed. Right, I'm going to come to the whole of the panel for responses to some of those ideas, but let's put the ball in Julie's court first.
Okay, so for me, a conundrum, and again, I'm going to be a pragmatist. Don't come up with problems.
That's what we want to hear.
A solution. A conundrum is, yesterday we saw the Chancellor of the Exchequer pre-budget sit there and effectively warn us about our massive levels of debt.
Yeah.
And here we are talking about routes to potentially increase that debt is our biggest problem, because we need to borrow more to build houses.
Yeah.
So I think we need to look at what's the cost of not doing it today. And this is these millions and millions of revenue costs currently going through the respective, certainly from local authorities, millions in revenue costs. And so for me, I think we should look at, what if you were allowed to borrow, you allowed headroom to borrow, and the benefit of that borrowing, the revenue benefit, what if councils gave a commitment to paying a greater proportion of that debt down quicker? So in other words, this is money that will be going out the door on nothing. If you can open up these sites and make a commitment to, 10 pence in the pound going to reduce debt payments, wouldn't that play to both the we need to reduce our national debt, and we do as a nation. Public borrowing contributes to that. Yep. So finding a way to encourage government not to go against its own policy is quite difficult, but what if we could come up with a way that said, you know what, if we can do this and free up cash from our revenue that we wouldn't spend anyway, in theory, this goes to your MRP, that is this imaginary capital repayment. But what if it wasn't? What if it was real? Because I do think, as an accountant, being saddled with debt, buying stuff on credit cards and paying one off or the other is a bad thing.
Yeah.
But I absolutely know that only capital investment can control this market that we've currently got, where we will willingly pay the difference between LHA rent and local London private landlords charging £2,000 a week for a property. So I do think there has to be a link between doing this in a short-term window as a crisis measure and a commitment to some of the gains being made being used to reduce debt, because otherwise we're just going to make a debt problem bigger. I hope that makes sense to everybody, and I welcome your views.
Absolutely, it does. Tracy, you've got your hand up. You might be responding to an earlier point, but interested in your thoughts on that as well.
Actually, listening to Julie there was also very interesting, but I was sort of responding to something that Adam was saying earlier. And part of me does sort of hark on back to a little bit to when we used to get 100% grant, or probably about 80% grant, when I first came into the industry. But we're not at that place, and it's never going to happen again. But the reality is there is a shortfall of money to build something out. You put together your appraisal, your land cost, that may be nil, the cost to build, all your on costs, which we all know have massively increased, and a lot of that's down to build safety and checking quality, etc. And you look at the bottom, and it's like, oh, your bottom line says I'm £1 million short. I'm obviously just generalizing about your £1 million. And this is what most people, they look at a discounted cash flow when they're looking to purchase affordable homes. So but we've also been talking about, and we're all very aware about, the massive cost of temporary accommodation and the big impact that's having. And I'm not going to go into how much, and for each borough, or totally in London or nationally. But if, for example, it's costing £2,000 a month to house four people family in some temporary accommodation, more, it's less, whatever, but that's generally what it costs. And so over the course of the year, that's 24,000. Let's assume it's 20,000, just to round up to make it easier for me to add up. But you build 50 homes and you put 50 families or 4 people, you're not paying that temporary accommodation money anymore, and you've already got 1.2 million. That's just a year saving for those 50. If you put that into your financial spreadsheet as a positive, a grant maybe, your £1 million negative that you had at your bottom line has got a £200 surplus. And I know in theory it doesn't quite work like that, because there'd be more people waiting to get onto the temporary accommodation list. But in practical terms, financially looking at it on a spreadsheet, it's a way of measuring a saving. What we can't measure, and we all know this, and this has been touched on by everybody, is we can't measure the saving as a society and the saving that has on education. And I think everyone's touched on this, education and health and policing. There's no way of measuring that on a development appraisal, which is unfortunate. And maybe if somebody's got a great idea, that would be brilliant to hear about that. And the same about building to a much higher quality and safety, and even looking at passive house standards, etc. It's a massive benefit to the residents, but you can't capture that financially. And so therefore you start to cut corners on things like that, because financially your scheme doesn't, or your development doesn't stack up. I think they would be my points to make. Yeah, no, that's great,
Tracy. And 2 hands went straight up, and I suspect it's in response to your point about not being able to measure those social outcomes from those measures. Julie, do you want to take that first, and also maybe respond to Darren Nathan's point? I mean, we're talking about amortising debt, aren't we, in order to reduce the pressure on temporary accommodation?
I think, and perhaps my answer is linked. The points I wanted to make were related to questions, but one in terms of amortising debt, I think the key is, and here's the risk, and my colleagues aren't going to like this, but I'm just going to say it as it is if you make savings on the general fund, there is a real risk headed towards elections that politically, because elected members of whatever party, they're there to benefit the community. There is a real risk that those savings just get spent on something else.
Yeah.
And what you end up with is a debt that is sitting there as well as. And I suppose that's why I'm talking about some level of restriction. Tracy's model of the savings of what you're now not spending on TA, what you can't do, or what we need to control, is the amount of those savings that can just be put into things that will mean that debt is never paid down. My second point is that, and somebody's asked, why did I say not third-party development companies? Mm-hmm. And I'll be brutally honest. Those third-party development companies exist because it was the only bloody way that we could find within our governance structures for councils to own housing, protected from right to buy and protect it in terms of assured short-hold tenancies. But there's a cost to doing it. So a cost that we wouldn't have to pay if we didn't have those rules to work around. So I'm just being a pragmatist. I'm not against those companies, but let's be very honest about why they exist. And they exist for that reason. I'm not seeking to stop it.
I would challenge that to a point, Julia, and that is that there are other reasons to put those companies in place. For example, generating revenue. At a very simple level, you can lend to them and get interest on the loans. And that's changed obviously with PWLB rates changing. But there are a number of benefits to it. But parking that. Meera, did you want to pick up on any of those points around measuring social value? And then, Anna, we're going to come to you for a sort of policy context, I think.
Yes, thank you, Toby. Just to say, yes, in your Optimix or other software model that you use to do a viability, you can't stick in the social value bits. But if you work with a local authority, you have to make a business case for capital expenditure. And in that report, you do talk about the cost avoidance, I used to call it, for TA. I used to even stick in council tax that you're going to get from new homes to kind of counter the big capital costs. Avoidance of using aids and adaptations for wheelchair housing. I mean, stick it in there. And eventually there is the case. And you can't, you're right, you can't measure the lessening of visits to A&E, etc., or the lessening on health things and policing, definitely. But there were quantifiable things that I could stick in my proposal that helped balance the book, helped make it look better and just get over whatever hurdle rate they were issuing at the time. That's all.
Meera, thanks. I'm sure all these things will be measurable once policing is an app. Then it'll all be easy. I just want to point out, just say thank you to Julie and Claire and Kerry and everyone for you're all helping each other in the chat, which is enabling us to keep to the conversational course. So I really appreciate you engaging with each other there. Anna, what is the likelihood that we will be able to do as Julie suggests?
Which aspect of what Julie's suggesting?
Effectively, amortising the debt in order to use money to relieve the pressure on housing.
I'm not familiar enough with the details of how the HRA works on that, really. And the point I did want to make is about whether we spend money on better TA or on permanent accommodation. Because one of the things that Julie is suggesting is buying up accommodation, letting it at local housing allowance to people who are still classed as homeless. And I think we should think, and then hoping that in the future you can convert them back to social rent. That's going to be very difficult because councils are going to remain under financial pressure for the foreseeable. I think we risk ending up with a kind of fourth tenure of people who are long-term TA. We've kind of done what we can to make it not too bad, but when they're in this kind of less secure, more expensive housing, and that perhaps we need to think a bit more about rent levels and for social housing, not be so negative about affordable rent rather than social rent. Anywhere else in the country, affordable rent can be up to 80% of market rent, which is actually about the same as LHA levels. In London, we try and aim for 60%. So are we sort of ending up with the perfect being the enemy of the good and not building this housing? We could give people LHA affordable rent, secured social tenancies. We know what the rent levels will go up. The government gives much more predictability over what will happen with rent rises on the affordable side than it does with LHA, which is frozen indefinitely. And gives the tenants what they want, is that they do want security, and the rent is fully eligible for housing benefit for people on affordable rent housing. So that might be a better solution for the tenant, giving them the security, a better solution for the council, because it's totally off your books. The DWP is paying their rent, not the council at all, and that would be a more secure housing tenure. I'd rather see councils buying up properties to use as that permanent housing that tenants really want and need, rather than buying them up saying, oh, it doesn't quite square to make it a social rent, and we won't do anything that isn't social rent, so we'll make it local housing allowance rent, and we'll put this person in it temporarily when both the property and the tenant may be there a very long time. So that was the kind of broader point I wanted to pick up on.
Okay, that's interesting. Adam, do you want to respond to that? And also, I want to pick up with you on this the kind of the meme, if you like, of this conversation, which is a kind of closer collaboration between housing regeneration development and 151 and finance within a local authority, and how you can work together to innovate and how you can build trust to be able to do that.
Yes, thank you, Toby. I mean, it is essential, and I work very closely with my 151 officer, and weirdly, even though I'm seen as an expert on HRA within Sutton, but because it's in my interest to work that the HRA is as effective as possible in delivering both new homes and, of course, the upgrades to the existing homes, which are essential as well. I do think that what we need to focus on is what we really need to be doing, right? And what we really need to be doing is providing long-term, high-quality homes for people. That's what makes the difference. And what we need to be, there has been some comments on this discussion around whether the mayor's plans as coming out of consultation, it's a short-term thing. And I think it's where you get to is the macro stuff of this, is that the political cycle is 4 or 5 years, and so politically there isn't necessarily the long-term strategic view of solving problems which aren't going to get me voted in, because it's going to take 10 years to, do you see what I mean? So it's that kind of structural stuff that we need to be addressing as a country, and to make the hard decisions now, which will in the future get the housing model back on track in this country. I mean, people say it's broken. It's kind of working in a very broken way, I would say, in that it's a dysfunctional but working system, and we need to get it more functional.
It's a fudge, isn't it, Adam? And that's what we do best, unfortunately.
Yes, we're good at that.
Julie.
Yeah, so I was just going to come back and clarify something. Of course, I think everybody should have long-term homes, but we're talking about two different things. Yeah. One, a statutory duty to house during a period of homelessness, which doesn't necessarily mean that person's circumstances or family, regrettable as they are, would qualify for long-term social housing. It could be a temporary issue. It could be a private sector landlord that hasn't paid their mortgage. It could be lots and lots of things. So otherwise, I think that saying we would be saying, effectively the state has obligations to house everybody all the time in all circumstances, and I don't think that we can. So there's a difference between statutory duty to house and social housing. What I'm looking at is a conundrum between an HRA who needs headroom for it to borrow to be able to invest in new long-term stock, and an income stream that I see currently going out of the door to private landlords for temporary accommodation. So I hope that clarifies why I'm suggesting the income stream that's going out of the door could come into the HRA. The second reason is not all, and I know this is about London, but there are other places in the country, and not all local authorities, in fact, many don't have an HRA, but they do have the statutory duty to house. If they were to go through an acquisitions programme, there's a risk to them, and they see it as a risk of having to create an HRA. So I hope that makes it clear. It's not that I'm unsympathetic. I'm seeing immediate problems. This is a short-term scheme. What are our short-term problems? I'm not saying that we don't then need longer-term schemes, which I think should be picked up in the next gateway tranches for grants. I hope that clarifies that I'm not the Wicked Witch of the West. I wasn't meaning to say that. It's just, I look at what do we need now? How do we help the HRA and local authorities and joining them dots?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Julie. Tracy?
I wanted to agree with both Julie and Anna, actually. Everybody on this panel, and I'm assuming a lot of people who have joined the webinar, will support that everybody is looking for a safe, long-term, secure home at a rent level they can afford. I agree about the affordable rent, and doesn't have to be social rent as long as it's covered by the benefit system if it needs to be. However, we do have a massive issue with temporary accommodation, and the bill is just getting bigger and bigger, and more people are probably becoming homeless and having to access temporary accommodation through councils, etc. And they can't afford to keep. There just isn't the money to pay for it. And we are going to see some really serious repercussions on that. And Julie, I think it was you that mentioned it when you looked at putting development opportunities into columns on a spreadsheet, perhaps, and potentially looking at using those stall sites for temporary accommodation. And I know that not everybody will agree with this, and that doesn't necessarily give somebody a safe home. But there is a way of building on those homes using a planning application to deliver short-term housing. And that short-term housing, although we could argue whether it comes up to design standards or whether it meets space standards, etc., has got to be a better opportunity for families and single people living in bed and breakfasts and hotels, or one room where they haven't got any facilities at all to be able to cook, wash, etc. And then you could ask, well, okay, let's look at those stall sites. Well, how are we going to afford to build anything on them? Because we still don't have any money. Well, when there's a crisis, we find money. As a government and as a country, we do find money. We could look, for example, at Nightingale hospitals. We didn't have any money. We just built those hospitals. I don't even know whether they had planning permission, etc. I'm not suggesting it's on the same scale, or maybe it is on the same scale, or even potentially larger. But we can find a way of doing things when we, as a country, agree there is a crisis. And there is a crisis. And so I think there are solutions around both what Anna was talking about, but also looking at some of those stall sites that are not going to be developed permanently for the next 10 years and utilising some of that space.
Thanks, Tracy. Okay, panel, we've got two questions that come in at more or less the same time. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm going to ignore Sam Phelps's question that suggests that we reduce bicycle storage space in order to improve viability. Sorry, Sam, but there's just no question. Alan Wright asks about right to buy, because we're still leaking homes through right to buy. So what's the position on right to buy at the moment? I'm slightly confused about it. Can anyone clarify? Because I understand that it's being phased out, but it seems to be being done without actually talking about it.
Yeah. Shall I come in on that?
Please, Anna.
I can give you the answer. So what the government did very shortly after coming in last year was to slash the discounts quite considerably. They did it quite quickly, trying not to make a big splash about it to avoid a big flurry of applications. They largely failed. They got a big flurry of applications. So most councils are dealing with a large glut of many ineligible applications because people were chancing it. It was now or never to get this big discount. So they're working through those. There will be a sort of short-term loss of stock. I think we are likely to see sales dry up quite considerably after that because the discounts are much, much lower. So that is happening. That has happened. But the government is not planning to get rid of the right to buy, despite quite a lot of pressure to do so. They announced a consultation on further reforms to it, which will extend the period you have to be a tenant before you can apply to buy, and also extend the period that you have to live in it after you've bought it before you can sell it without repaying the discount, and also some protections for new build properties properties for 35 years in that consultation, which would mean you can build with the confidence that you're not going to have to sell that home, at least not for a long time. So those are really good things that will help further, I think. And the Housing Forum put out a report on the right to buy. They picked up on many of our ideas in the consultation. So we're really pleased to see the protection to a new build in particular. That was something we were calling for. But I don't think the government's in a hurry on this one. They've said they will do it when parliamentary time allows. That suggests to me it is not seen as a priority in the first couple of years of them being in power. They'll do it hopefully before the end of their Clive term. But I think because they've slashed the discounts, they think there's not really a need to be hurrying on it. So that's where they're at.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. There you go, Alan. Visit Housing Forum website for the report. Julia, so Adam, I'll come to you in just a second. But Julia, you had some interesting thoughts on right to buy receipts.
Yeah. So I do think that there has been a glut, and whilst a lot of applications won't get through, a sizable lot will. What we will see, and you can look back and see this as an accurate statement, is the tipping point, at the point at which you don't have to pay back the discount, watch those houses come back on the market. And I think we should have HRA business plans that look forward to that 30 years and understand that tipping point. Contractually, local authorities have the right but not the obligation to buy back those properties. And indeed, I think it was Sutton actually quite led the way in that process several years ago. I used to work there, so I know that quite well. So we are going to see it tip back. And it'll be interesting in that 5-year point for us to look and say, was she right? And I'll bet anybody a drink at the bar that I am. So that's one thing.
Just let's be clear, which bar, Julie?
Which bar? A cheap one. So that's one thing. It is, there is an ability to buy them back. There is an ability to utilise capital receipts, ironically, to buy back the houses that were sold with the discount in the first place. We don't like it, but it exists. And I also think on the right to buy, I would like to see, I love the idea that people can have their own homes. I've got mine. Why would I want to deny anybody else that opportunity? But I do think that we should be looking at restrictions on being able to sublet. We should be looking at overage agreements on properties, because when you buy them back, funnily enough, they've turned into flats. I think we should be looking at things like that. But I don't think we should deny people on lower incomes the opportunity to have their own home. It just needs to be done in a fair and equitable way, and some of that common sense, which is a rare commodity, isn't it? Common sense coming back into some of those contractual things. I also think that if you give a discount, I don't understand why we don't have an overage agreement on profit in terms of disposals at any point. A lot of private homeowners who have a plot, I know this, because just gone to get planning permission to build on a side plot, and lo and behold, the local authority's got an overage agreement on that, should ever that plot be built on. So I would like to see some balance in that. But ironically, those properties will come back in a bump. Take a look at the stats. At the last time the subsidy levels were increased, watch the tipping point 5 years later and watch how many come back.
We'll look out for it, Julie.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Anna, super quick, please, and then we'll conclude with Adam.
Just on the renting it out, what we were calling for wasn't a ban on renting properties out, but it was a right of first refusal to rent to the council at council rents, which would mean if somebody was working abroad for a year, okay, they can rent it out and the council gets another property they can use for TA or whatever. That I think would be a really good solution, but unfortunately the government explicitly dismissed it in their consultations. I don't think they're going to do it at the moment, but we're worth still calling for in the future.
Thanks, Anna. Adam, over to you to kind of pick up on whatever threads you wanted to sort of finish up with. And I don't know if you've got time to address Michael Kennedy's point that he's raised it a couple of times now on changes to design standards in particular and how that might impact delivery.
Okay, yeah, let's be responsive to questions. That's a good thing. Yeah, design standards. I have a slightly different view than you, Toby, on cycle stores. So that's firstly to say, there's lots of empty cycle stores that
are. Adam.
Yeah, well, there we go. It's a personal opinion, not one of London Borough Sutton. But yeah, the numbers of homes off a core and the dual aspect thing, I think arbitrary standards, they can work. But I think that when you are building homes and when you're designing homes, you need to get the homes right for the local context.
Yep.
And I think so some more flexibility there is actually a good thing. And I think that the requirement for the number off a core is some flex on that is good. We generally achieve,
and actually it's the wrong form of storage. That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's massively underutilized because it's rubbish. So
yeah, there you go. So yeah, and I do think the dual aspect, we generally achieve very high levels of dual aspect, 85, 90%. But I think it's simply impossible in something, in a city as dense as London to achieve that across the board. So I think some flexibility there is good.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And any other points you want to pick up on before we close?
No, that's it for me. I think it's been a lively and interesting conversation. Julie, thank you so much. I think your energy and your vision have been very helpful. And I'm sorry for the questions that we haven't got to. That's probably Toby to say that. But thank you for the active chat and the questions. It's good.
Absolutely, Adam. I reiterate your point. Audience, you've been fantastic and engaged, and we're really grateful for that. So let's draw it to a close and allow you to get your second cup of coffee of the day. And maybe slightly later than normal. We really appreciate you joining us. Please join me in thanking our fantastic panelists for an energising and insightful conversation. Virtual thanks to you, Meera Bedi for Future of London. Thank you very much. Anna Clarke from the Housing Forum. Thank you, Julie Lorraine of No Fixed Abode Yet. We look forward to
Watch this
your
space.
next steps. Yeah, exactly. Thank you to Adam Tucker from the London Borough of Sutton and to Tracy Bradwell from Loft, both for your contribution today to the conversation, but also for the sponsorship that Loft provides that makes this webinar and the whole Sutton season possible, along with Lovell Partnerships. So, audience, thank you for sticking with us during your breakfast time. We're going to be back on Monday, publishing interviews from the London Borough of Enfield and back online with them at the end of the month. So watch out for those on LinkedIn and other channels. But in the meantime, thank you to everyone at Sutton Council, Loft and Lovell Partnerships and our audience for your contribution to 1.5 million new homes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Toby.
Thank you.